Thank you everyone for coming today. We're really excited to have this opportunity to talk about our project we've been working on, and also thank you, John, for the introduction. So what I'd like to do as we're getting started is actually take a poll of the audience, and we're going to poll through Google because our hope is to put the results right into the slide presentation when this is finished. And so if Eric could post the poll link, we're going to be talking about finals, and this is kind of at the top of our minds at Rose. Our finals are actually next week. We're on a quarter system here, so we aren't done yet, but we'd like to talk about finals today. And are they your love-hate relationship? So maybe for us, we love seeing a student do really well, but we hate having to grade all those finals. Maybe even students have that love-hate relationship. They hate taking them, but they love being done. And so what we're kind of hoping to do is put a little bit more of a love part into this relationship with transforming our final experience. And so while you're filling in the poll, I'm going to briefly introduce what we do at Rose-Hulman. And so at Rose, I will be talking about our introduction to statistics. It's actually titled Engineering Statistics. Rose-Hulman is a primarily undergraduate university in central Indiana. Most of our students are STEM and mostly engineering majors. And this engineering statistics class is required for several of our engineering and also science majors on campus. And this tends to be a terminal course in statistics for these students. We, as such, are seeing a lot of students. It's required for most majors on campus. We have offerings all 3 terms, fall, winter, spring. Fall and winter are a little bit lighter. We have about 3 sections with 25 students each. And in the spring, we'll have maybe 6 to 9 sections with maybe a little bit lower enrollment with all those sections. We definitely have multiple people teaching the class each term. And during the term, we kind of informally coordinate. So we make sure we cover the same basic ideas and topics, but we can go in any order that we want to. We can write our own assignments. But final exams, we are required to coordinate by departmental policy. So the policy within our department is that the final exam is jointly written by all instructors that term. And it has to be held during the institute assigned 4-hour time slot. Not only that, but we have a specific structure that we're supposed to be using in our final exam. And so our final exams consist of 2 parts, by hands and a computer assisted portion. And so we're going to be focusing on this computer assisted portion in the presentation today, since we're still forced to do these 2 parts. But I want to take a second and go ahead and see what everyone else is doing that's here. So let me pull this back up. And if you haven't done the poll yet, we'll update these at the end of the session so that it's all set up. It looks like most people in here are running a traditional exam, which is kind of where we were before all this got started. And you guys look kind of to be a little bit luckier than us. It looks like your finals are controlled by you. So you may have a little bit more freedom than us and be able to do something like this in your classroom too. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about how we brainstormed through transforming our final exam. And so our first challenge was we wanted to see students engaged, but we also need to be addressing departmental policy and making sure that we're following the rules. And these institute policies, the final exam timing, the departmental policy being 2 parts, they're not going to change in the near future. Eric and I are 2 of about 25 faculty in the math department. And so we're kind of the small guys in terms of what's actually happening in math at Rose. And these policies are for all courses of math instruction, which include calculus, differential equations. And so we're going to need to still fit into that framework of what's required. And this idea kind of came after we were having lunch and we're talking about how it was really kind of not that awesome. We were seeing students in these traditional closed notes exams or working as an individual. They're coming in really anxious. We have engineering majors that are just kind of sitting by themselves, not looking very happy. We also see students that really didn't necessarily care about the stats, and they were just worried about earning points and doing what they had to do to get through it. And that's not what we want to see for the last time in our classroom. We want to see students engaged, enthusiastic, experiencing statistics. So hopefully without taking it too far, we kind of felt like we were in this Lord of the Rings scenario. We have this one exam that everyone has to take, and students were kind of feeling like they were abandoned, and we really want them engaging and taking more of a hold in that final. So I'm going to swap over to Eric.
Our approach to kind of addressing this was to develop a practicum. And so what do we mean by that? Well, in our very first iteration, we always try to link our scenario, and all students are working with the same scenario, to something that we can link to the physics, the chemistry, the engineering. We can reference some of the science behind it. So our first one was breaking spaghetti. At the time that we kind of launched this the first time, reports were coming out and lots of popular media capturing the fact that when you break spaghetti, it always breaks into 3 or more pieces when you break it traditionally, unless you add a twist. And so we kind of described that. We referenced the paper, and then we ended with a somewhat open-ended question. Does the longest piece of broken pasta noodle differ across different snapping techniques? That's the prompt. All students get the same prompt, and that's about it in terms of direction of where this is going to go. And this is actually one of our more directed prompts. Sometimes we have something that's a little bit less directed, like characterize the breaking behavior of spaghetti, and we would leave it at that. This one was a little bit more directed. In addition to a prompt, we give them what materials they are allowed to use to investigate. In this particular case, it was we provided rulers, and we provided up to 50 pieces of spaghetti. But other than that, it's up to them. And so we didn't even specify traditional breaking versus twisting versus one other method, right? We left it up to them to decide. And we try to pose the questions the same way that our engineering and science colleagues across campus tend to pose questions, so they can see it the way that they're going to. We had students doing, again, kind of a traditional break, to students taking their table and just taking spaghetti and whacking it on the table and seeing how it broke. So we left it, again, completely up to them. They work in groups of 2 to 3 students. And again, our class sizes are about 20 to 25. They have 2.5 hours to complete it, and they're giving a report that's electronically submitted through our LMS. And so by report, it's really kind of a guided report. There are a set of about 12 questions that guide them from beginning to end of the analysis. These serve as both kind of a guidepost and a check to make sure that they're hitting all of the major benchmarks that we discussed throughout the course. So it starts with like a hypothesis. What are the parameters? What's the question that you're asking? Especially when the prompt isn't a directed question, they need to let us know what it is they're trying to study. Then it moves into study design, and this is a large part of it. About 40% of the grade goes towards the study design on this component. And so we ask questions like, describe the data collection process in enough detail that a third party could replicate it. That includes how was randomization used? Did you use random sampling, random design, or random allocation, any of those kind of things? Do you think your data is representative of a more general population? And if so, how? What things did you do well? We also ask about what limitations. Clearly, you can't do everything you would want in this 2.5 hours. How would you change the study design in the future? We ask them to give us a summary of the data. We ask them to describe their methodology. Are they using regression, ANOVA, a repeated measures study? And again, another large component is the checking conditions, right? So after they've actually designed the study, collected the data, and then looked at it a little bit, they need to analyze it in a way that's consistent with the data that they collected. So for example, if normality is violated, we expect them to do bootstrapping or some other randomization-based procedure. And then finally, answer the question that was posed in context, cite a p-value, confidence intervals, whatever's appropriate there. So this was our approach, but there are others that you could take. Again, we started with an exam, and we often kind of accompanied our exam with a final project in the class. And so I think a natural question is, how is this practicum different than a project? So here's kind of different things we thought about with these different three kind of assessment techniques. But I want to hit kind of two of them in particular. Because our practicum is happening synchronously in a classroom generally, 2.5 hours, all students working at the same time, it becomes a lot less formative and more summative. By that, I mean that normally our projects span at least a week, if not multiple weeks in our course. And we were big fans of projects before we moved to the practicum. And our students would take a question and they would come back to us and say, here's what I'm thinking, you know, can you help me refine this? And we would go back and forth. And so they were really learning the material as they went through the project, which is great. We loved that. We got great questions. But it didn't give us really a snapshot of what are they capable of given resources without kind of, again, having to relearn the material. In this 2.5 hours, they can reference their notes, their videos, anything we have on our course site, but that's not enough time for them to relearn the material if they're struggling with it. It really is a demonstration of, I can reference it quickly, but this is what I know at this point in time. Perhaps maybe the greatest advantage that came out of this, and it's totally unintended, was the impact on the curriculum. So as Megan said, in the spring, we teach with a lot of colleagues from our math department, most of which haven't taught statistics in a while. And if they have, it's more of a classic kind of intro course and not a modern course. And so they focused a lot on, you know, formulas and derivations and not so much on design and data collection and describing the results in context. And when we said, hey, you guys should do a project, they were all on board with that. Not a problem, but it became an add-on to them. They did their typical teaching, and then the project was just, here, go collect some data and give me a report about it. It didn't change how they taught the course. The moment we moved to a practicum, and we would hand them the final exam at the beginning of the term and say, hey, this is what we're going to be aiming for, they suddenly start asking questions like, wow, how am I supposed to prepare my students for this? What do you do? How do you make sure that they can handle this kind of data collection and report in that time frame? And those are the conversations we love having. We are glad to talk about how you can add labs to your class and activities and more hands-on, and talk more about data collection and design and less about the formulas or the probability theory. And so it moved them a little bit out of their comfort zone, but I think really made the course a little bit more modern when they were teaching.
All right, so I'm gonna kind of zoom through a couple of these slides, but kind of going along with the theme of eCOTS. We feel like the practicum is engaging students. Engaging their curiosity. One of the topics we looked at was rattlebacks. Rattlebacks only want to spin one direction. And so we asked students to describe rattleback motion through a statistical model. We're engaging them because they're creating data during the finals period. And so there's a video. This last winter, we did the traditional helicopter experiment in our class. And so we had students collecting data. Students get to work together in teams from start to finish on this part of the exam. And so there's a couple pictures of our students working. Our group sizes are usually between 2 and 3, although every once in a while we'll have a group of 4. And in the end, they're performing a full statistical analysis. We're hoping to see them engage and experience statistics in a way that they will see in their careers. And so we're working with mostly STEM students. And so these are both consumers and producers of statistics. And so we give them a survey before and after class that asks them how likely it seems they'll use stats after the course. And we're seeing a huge, well, not huge, but a movement of students from not being sure or thinking they won't use it to actually thinking they are going to use it. We do see some that come in thinking they might use it, and then they drop off and say, nah, I'm not going to use this anymore. We don't know what's happening there, but we're encouraged to see that. We are testing students. This is a final, and so we think we're asking them some pretty tough questions in this. Here's a couple example questions. And we also asked our students how they feel, and they'll say their comments say They feel like it applied all their knowledge. They felt like they learned as well as being assessed. They give a way to show their skills for what we used for most of the class. They tend to prefer the practicum. So we kind of asked this question in two different ways. Which assessment do you prefer, a traditional exam, the practicum, or either? Because most students are used to that traditional exam. We also ask if they'd recommend it for future terms. And so we're seeing way more than half of the students that are participating actually wanting to do this practicum in the end. And this is the only final exam I've ever seen where I've seen students like laughing and happy. And they also put that in their comments that it was relaxed and low stress. They liked approaching the problem from start to finish. It was kind of fun. It felt like a puzzle. So not just trying to say everything is rosy. There are some things students don't like. Some of them don't want to work in groups. We let them choose their groups. But if they don't have a group to work in, we do assign them into a group. Some of them still think that the course material is difficult. We can't really get around that. Some think collecting data is tedious, while others wish they could collect more data.
So when we launched into this, again, we had this idea, but the biggest thing for us is being able to collect the supplies in enough time and then come up with an activity that they can do in a short period of time. So we were lucky. We sought some institutional funds, internal grant, but I think like most in statistics education, it really came down to our ability to stretch a dollar. And so as Megan kind of showed some of the things, we purchase supplies in bulk and as cheaply as possible. But we also rely heavily on things that students already bring to the classroom or that we have access to in our offices or across campus. So that's kind of the next question. We want to kind of use the collective wisdom of the group here. Megan's going to post this link into the chat. But what materials do you think that students either tend to bring to class or that students already have access to in the labs that we could use in order to conduct one of these things? I don't see it popping up in the whole thing, so I'm going to add it real quick. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I can't seem to get it to pop
That's okay.
up.
There you go. So there's the link. So if you could go in there and we'll collect some of the materials that are available there. So while you're doing that, clearly this term is different for everybody. So our mascot is Rosie the elephant. This is one of our active learning classrooms where a lot of times our finals take place. But what do we do in the remote learning situation? So I don't have a great answer, unfortunately, but here are two approaches we've taken. I teach in the summer online, and I run the practicum in a condensed framework. So it really does end up feeling more like a course project in the end. Instead of having 2.5 hours, they have a week. But you have to open it up to more time in order to account for the different geography of students spread out. This term, because we're coordinating with, again, other instructors, we decided to take a different approach. Instead of doing asynchronous kind of data collection, we decided to do kind of capture as much of this as we could, but in a short time frame. So instead of actually collecting the data, they do design a study. We give them a prompt, and we tell them what resources would be available to them, and we ask them to design a study and go through that process, just not collect the data. So still not quite where we wanted, but close. And then we provided a different data set and said, again, characterize the behavior. And then they could ask a specific question using that data and then walk through the second half. So we kind of split this into two components. Again, not the ideal solution, but something that we came up with for this term, given the unique situation that we're in. So let's see what kind of materials you guys came up with. Some that we kind of pre-populated here. We have access to rubber bands, paper, paper clips, Post-it notes, cell phone, stopwatch, anything that's online and can be accessed on a mobile device, I think is a great tool that could be used. We really rely on paper a lot. You saw the paper helicopters. In the summer, when I do online, again, I have to have materials that students have at home. I've used paper to do paper airplane designs. And then again, characterize the behavior, whether that's longest flight or distance or something like that. Pencils and writing utensils. With paper clips, you can start to think about breaking strength or, again, weights on paper helicopters and things like that. Again, we're going to make these slides available so that you can have all of these resources to use as you start thinking about a potential activity in your class in the future. So we do have some other challenges that we face other than just getting supplies. It does take effort. Go ahead and give there we go. I think the one that I want to hit on here is, again, coming up with one that fits in a 2-hour time frame. And again, there's a benefit of it made us start to think about how we prepare students and our colleagues, how you prepare students for something like this. And so we do lots of activities. I noticed that one of the questions was, how do students feel about group work? Again, some students hate group work no matter what you do. To help with that, one of the things we do is we let them choose groups, and often we have them work in groups throughout the term, the same groups, on homework, on in-class labs and activities. That allows us to resolve any group issues and makes that group a little bit tighter knit before they go into the final. And that relieved a lot of stress, at least from my students, as we looked at what this might be like on the final. So they were well prepared. They had seen labs like this and write-ups like this going into it, and they weren't too nervous about that aspect of it. So our last kind of question, and we're going to ask you to post in the chat window here. So make sure you switch your chat to all panelists and attendees so everybody can kind of see the different ideas. But as we get started, what is it that you want your final assessment to do? Whether you end up with a traditional exam, a project, or practicum, what is it that you hope the goal is? Two of ours that kind of drove our decision making here was we want it to be authentic. And so for our students, they typically use statistics for senior design, mini research projects. And so we wanted to give that kind of flavor. And the second, we wanted our exam to be reflective of the nature of our course, even the atmosphere of our course, which is lighthearted, but also has statistical reasoning and literacy, as well as design and analysis. We wanted all of those aspects. And so that kind of drove ours. So again, if you want to post in the chat, what are some of the goals that you have for a final assessment? And again, we'll collate these and add these to our slides from any good ideas that are out there and have those posted afterwards. So I think we have a few minutes left for questions. So looking at some of the Q&A that's up here.
So Eric, I'll go ahead and read off the questions to make sure, and then either of you can choose to answer. So we had one question that says, how do you define the teams? Do you allow any cross collaboration among the teams?
So I kind of described how I do my teams. Megan, how do you do yours?
Yeah, so I encourage my students to work together in groups throughout the term. They get to pick their teams. We do ask that they don't have more than, or I ask them not to have more than 3 students. So 2 or 3 is okay. Those that really don't want to work together during the term, they are assigned into teams at the end for the final in my class.
Another question was, after moving to the practicum, do you still have a semester-long project? I'm wondering if the semester-long projects or project would be good preparation for the practicum, and if the project still offers the formative learning. And Eric, you spoke a little bit about this, but could you expand?
Yeah, so I don't do a semester-long project anymore. Instead, I do 2 to 3 mini labs. So as a group or as a whole class, we have a discussion on setting up a design for a question and a prompt. And then they work in small groups to complete the report. And the report mirrors very closely what they're going to see on the final exam. I think I kind of build up. The first 2 labs that I do in my class, there's a lot of group discussion, and we kind of settle as a class on what the right design is and what the best data collection processes are, and we kind of share the data. And then I transition to the last lab in the class. We kind of have a little bit of class discussion, but then I turn them loose in small groups, again, the same ones they'll be working with on the final, to complete the report and do the data collection. So by that point, we use them as, again, learning experiences throughout. And those mini labs, to be honest, I grade them on completion and just give feedback so that, again, they're constantly building towards that final exam. So I personally don't use a course-long project anymore, but have opted for lots of small kind of different things to make sure I hit on different components of the course, whether that's comparing groups or 2 sample test or 1 sample test.
I do something similar to Eric. I really don't have time for a project with the other assignments in my class. I do think the practicum arose because of some constraints. I think a project is a great final assessment as well.
So I think this one's probably, this was a question that came in my mind too, and a couple people mentioned it on here, is how, if at all, are you able to accommodate students who get extra time on a traditional exam or just might need a little extra time?
Yeah, so we spoke to that department on our campus, and the response that we got is that, so I have to be careful here, you have to give every opportunity for those students, but it's not guaranteed additional time across the board. So those students with accommodations for us, they get additional time on the closed note portion, the traditional by hand, no computer assisted portion. However, because group work is an integral part of this exam and that collaboration is a key component, the recommendation we got from our institute is we don't have to give additional time. That's part of it. That's very similar to what they would get in an industry setting. And we also approach our course with a universal design kind of atmosphere anyway. The labs that we do during the course can usually be completed in a 50-minute period. And so the students are used to kind of writing that up pretty quickly. So when we move to a 2.5 hours, we've got enough time built in that usually it's not been an issue. I don't think I've had a group take the complete 2.5 hours yet. Almost always they're done 15 to 30 minutes early, most groups within an hour and a half.
And then there were a couple of questions that dealt with the issue of, and I'm sure many students always feel that when they work in groups, this is what they often comment on: I'm doing all the work, or this one student is not pulling their weight. So have you run into those things, and how do you modify what you're doing, or how do you attend to those things?
Yeah, I do see students that are frustrated with the group work. Since I don't actually require them to have to work together till the final, I don't really, those ones that are really not wanting to participate tend to get grouped together because they didn't want to work together in the first place. And I don't know if that's a very good solution, but they get forced into it. I don't really know if there's a great way to alleviate it. Now, throughout the term, if they talk with me about it, I try and give them tips on group work. I don't know if Eric has anything better to add.
Yeah, again, I've alleviated a lot of the problems by putting them in groups and having them do their homework throughout. And so I can kind of observe the participation and kind of intervene if necessary. And that's alleviated most of it. Recently, I did have one issue. And so that's prompted me to add a clause to my syllabus that talks about what group participation looks like and how to file a complaint if a group member doesn't working. And again, I borrowed a lot of that from engineering disciplines. They have a lot of syllabi that talk about group participation, and if you're not participating at a certain level, how you would file a complaint, very similar to a workplace environment and where you might get fired. So the group ends up kind of reporting to the instructor, and they can add additional penalties. So I have a clause now that says I can levy additional penalties against an individual if the majority of the group feels that they aren't participating and provide evidence towards that end.
And we have time for one more question, and I think 3 or 4 people mentioned something along these lines, which is when you're grading that final exam, are there differential grades for students in a group? Do all the students in a group get the same grade? How is the grading done?
So we have them turn in 1 report per group. So all the students end up with the same grade on that part of the final. They do have the individual component that they're completing beforehand that kind of we still are able to see the difference between the students that maybe have been writing on coattails and those that really do know what's going on.
Okay, I am going to post to the chat window the hot topic poll where you can vote for at the end of the day or anytime during the day, that you can vote for your choice for a hot topic that you want to hear more about on Friday. And you can certainly vote for Eric and Megan's presentation. I'm also going to post a little information on the Slack link, the Twitter page, Facebook, etc. So first of all, I want to thank Megan and Eric for your presentation. I was really excited to get to moderate this session because the topic is definitely one that I've thought a lot about, and how do you actually operationalize it? And I really appreciate your answering those questions for me.